LibertyCon people. My name is Michael H. Hanson, and I'm here to tell you all about what's new with Copper Dog Publishing. Copper Dog Publishing is a small micro press, I like to call it. It's located in Louisville, Colorado, and it has 3 imprints: Moondream Press, Racket River Press, and Pumpkin Hill Press. And I'm basically going to be talking about Moondream Press. And I have some of the authors involved in a number of the projects that Moondream Press is putting out this year and will also be coming out with in the coming months. First, I'd like to introduce everybody that's on this panel. The engineer of this whole project and also one of our writers who goes under a different name, William Joseph Roberts. Say hi, William.
Hi.
Yeah, he also likes to go under the nom de plume of Scott Hillbilly Tackett. And then I have Edward McKeown, another writer within.
Pleasure to meet everybody. Hope you all doing well.
The newest member of the Copper Dog Publishing team, or the Moondream Press team, is Tim Mulverhill. Say hi, Tim. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, there we go. And last but not least, somebody who I'm told is a digital nomad down in Buenos Aires, the one and only Gustavo Bondoni. Gustavo?
Hi, everyone.
Great. Well, I'd like to start off with a couple of the newest projects that have been published in recent months, and then we'll go on to some projects that are in the works, and we'll get some feedback from a number of the authors here on what they're working on, and you know, a little insight into what it's like to work for Copper Dog / Moondream Press. The Shada series is one of the first things that Copper Dog Publishing put out. This is the very first book in the series. And the 7th book came out not too long ago. And that is Zombie Park. To give you the briefest of overviews, just think of the Shada as the mother of all apocalypses. And the wonderful thing about all these books is you can read them in any order because they all take place over the same 2 days in the near future when, like I said, the mother of all apocalypses occur. One of the authors for Zombie Park is Gustavo Bondoni. So Gustavo, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story that's in this wonderful anthology?
Cool. So my story, as the title kind of gives away, it's set in Central Park in New York during the Shada. And that means that everyone in the park at that time is basically involved in the apocalypse. My particular story takes place in the southern end of Central Park, near the Carousel, and it was actually inspired, there's my name, it was actually inspired by the story of the Carousel, at least of the renovation. The Carousel was renovated by the parents of a little girl who had died of cancer and basically renovated in her memory. So I took that Carousel, which I think is a very powerful spot in Central Park, and turned it into the spot where the apocalypse enters Central Park. And Fire Within, Fire Below, which is the title of the story, refers basically to the fact that, well, within that carousel there is a lot of power, and that is a typical place where the apocalypse can enter the regular world, if you like. So my story is based around there. It's a story about basically zombies and monsters chasing after the people who are there, and how those people get around them and try to survive in that situation. And I don't want to give away the plot, but basically the people are some civilians and a few military personnel who are actually inside the park when all this starts going on.
Cool. Just to let you know, Shada Zombie Park is the very first Shada novella anthology. The first 6 volumes before that were all short story ones, and we're basically phasing our way out of doing short story anthologies. So there were only 3 official authors on Zombie Park: Eric S. Brown, Gustavo Bondoni, and Jason Cordova. And I think that comes clear. And I wrote the prologue, the interludes between chapters, and the epilogue for it, which is just roughly 7,000 words. So basically all the heavy lifting was done by Eric Brown, Gustavo Bondoni, and Jason Cordova. Eric and Jason couldn't make it, but they send their best wishes, and we hope you read the book, and I think you'll enjoy it a lot. I'd like to do one more Shaddaa book that's currently being worked on, and then we'll move forward on to Ed McKeown's wonderful science fiction series that Moondream Press puts out. We're doing one more Shaddaa novella anthology, which will have either 5 or 6 novellas in it, and it is called Shaddaa War. And each chapter takes place in a different war from either the 19th or the 20th centuries. Right now, the only 2 writers available are myself and Tim Mulverhill. And there's a little story behind how Shaddaa War began, but I'll tell you about that in a couple of minutes. I just first like to introduce Tim. And Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about the novella that you wrote for Shaddaa War?
Sure. So, rebuff myself. Also, all throughout my life since I was a teenager, reading every book of some form of an apocalypse or another. It was really the niche that has captured me. You know, growing up during the Cold War, you know, the 70s and the 80s, and you know, Jerry Pournelle and David Penn and all those stories that were put out there. You know, that's what I was raised on, and that kind of crashed into my interest of military history. I've had some stories rattling around in my head probably the last 30 years that were somewhat related to the one that came out that you eventually got to see. It was sort of inspired by Kelly's Heroes meets Catch-22 sort of influence. And then started reading the Shaddaa series, and especially once I got my hands on Facets, which really delved into what really was alternate history influenced by Shaddaa canon, and what came out was a direct result of that. You know, the stories that really get me are the ones of the what ifs that could have happened. There's no way to disprove them. So I found myself doing a lot of research into my story. It would have happened faster, but then I'm researching everything from German U-boat manufacturing, the fall of the Third Reich, to antimatter versus nuclear weapons development, the Manhattan Project, all sorts of crazy stuff that wound up going into the story, which is all based on fact. Even the locations that are in the story, you can go to Google Earth and find every exact spot where something takes place, and it's all historically accurate to a point. So that was sort of where that all came from, and put that all together with no expectation that it was going to go anywhere. I don't know if you recall when I reached out to you originally. It was just hey, kind of did this thing on my own, but maybe you want to look at it, maybe you don't. No harm, no foul either way, and let you pick it up from there.
Okay, I decided that, I'll admit to something that I probably shouldn't as a publisher, but Tim Mulverhill had the gall to do the unthinkable. He did everything he just told us about on his own without ever contacting me or me really knowing him or us discussing things like is usually the case. Most of the stuff that we put out in Copper Dog Publishing is invitation only. We just haven't risen to the level where we can have an open call for anything. We don't have the infrastructure and the staff to deal with that. But Tim, a man full of incredible gall, wrote a novella set within the Shaddaa, acknowledging several of the different Shaddaa volumes, characters within them. He really knew the series. I was very hesitant to read what you sent me, but then when I did, I was completely and utterly blown away. So I'm not suggesting anybody anywhere in the world do this, because chances are there'll be a lot of blowback and it won't work. But Tim took an incredible risk as a writer in terms of time and research, and he just created this wonderful novella. And because I read it, that is how Shaddaa War began. There was no Shaddaa War. There was no concept of this anthology that would take place over the 19th and 20th centuries. And just because Tim wrote such a wonderful tale that needed almost no editing in terms of plot, I just decided, you know what? If I can get a few more authors on board, I want to do this. And to give you a little piece of background info that nobody else will know about, I will be writing a prologue and interludes between all the chapters and an epilogue, like I did with Shaddaa Zombie Park. But these will not be told from the point of view of our favorite character, Johnny the Salesman, this godlike being who wants to help mankind out. They'll be told from the point of view of a character known as Prana, or Prana 666. You would know about him if you read this book. Let's see if I've got this on the right side. He's basically pretty much a godlike being himself, and he splits off from a larger version of himself, and he wants to learn about humanity, so he travels throughout time. And in this book, he's basically traveling to all these major wars, and he's seeing, what is humanity all about? Are they just evil and killers, or is there some nobility to them? You know, is there something about them that deserves to survive past the Shaddaa event, which takes place in the near future? The majority, not all of them, but the majority of the Shaddaa books take place over 48 hours in the near future. And all the Shaddaas, and basically the Shaddaas have occurred every 10,000 years since the beginning of time. And of course you wonder, how did mankind survive all these? Well, you find out a little about that throughout the different books. We give away more and more clues and hints with every new book that comes out. So Shaddaa War, there is another author who couldn't make the chat, but we're going to edit her in. Her name is Rachel Cates, and she wrote just a fantastic chapter for this. It's a wonderful novella, and we'll do a little cutaway so that she can tell us a little bit about that, her involvement with Copper Dog Publishing. She's written in some of the other collections. And, well, Rachel, have a little talk there.
Hello from Wisconsin. My name is RJ Layton, and I wrote a story for Copper Dog Publishing called Loyalties. This is a Shaddaa story, and it will be found in a collection of stories in a book called War. It is based in the American Revolutionary War, and I had a hard time finding an American hero to use in this story. I ended up with a French hero by the name of Nicolas Godot. Nicolas Godot is a captain of a ship called the Monsieur, and Godot is famous for, in France anyway, for taking 28 ships in 4 months. And I guess that's a pretty good record. The king gave him a sword as a thank you, and Godot prized that sword. And he also worked with a gentleman by the name of John Paul Jones, an American captain. But John Paul Jones had a huge background, and I couldn't use him. And Godot didn't get along with John Paul Jones, and they ended up parting ways after 4 days. After he parted ways with John Paul Jones, he ended up getting captured by 2 British Channel ships. And from what I understand, there's no history of Godot after that. So what could have happened is maybe Johnny got involved, and maybe there was more to it in the battle between those 3 ships. So that's where my story goes. It takes Johnny and messes with the world, and all hell breaks loose in every literal sense. Godot survives in my version, and so does a demon, which I thought would be interesting to have a demon running around the American hillside. I hope you enjoy reading my story, Loyalties, found in War. And I am also found in other short stories. I wrote 2 other short stories for Shaddaa, and both of them are found in toys, Shaddaa toys. And recently I published my first real novel, full length, and it's called Bloodstone, Written in Stone. And it's a urban fantasy, young adult, new adult, as the kids are 18 or so. They're high school seniors, and there is a gargoyle involved. Here's the cover. Audio is also available through Audible, if you're interested. Again, my name is RJ Layton. Thank you very much.
And I guess we're back from the cut now. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate the fact you were able to send your video in. What I'd like to turn to now is another portion of Moondream Press. Basically, Moondream Press is the imprint that all of our science fiction, fantasy and horror comes out in, which so far includes the Shada series, a couple of science fiction books, one by C.J. Henderson and a couple of other authors, and some poetry books, 2 dark poetry books that I wrote, and also the Book of Night, which was edited by Richard Groller. And it's just this huge volume of wonderful poems by a lot of famous, but now, passed away poets, and also a lot of poets currently alive. And right now, the audio version of that is being recorded by a voice talent named Chris J. Davis. He's got a fantastic voice. He works through the ACX system. And as soon as that becomes available, we'll be selling that on Audible, which you can access via Amazon. But what I'd like to turn to now is our well-known science fiction writer, Edward McKeown, who's written basically what's becoming 2 series that are connected, which is the Morrow series, which is being followed up by the Morrow Sea Changes series. And Ed would like to show the latest book that came out in that. The first book in the Morrow Sea Changes is Legacies. Ed, could you give us a good gander? Okay.
There you go.
Well, just a little bit back. Want to see it all? Yeah. Title Legacies. And, well, Ed, I'd just like to have you tell us a little about that, a little about the Morrow series, and maybe a little about the next book coming up. Just take it.
Well, as Mike says, I'm a member of Copper Dog Moondream. I'm actually the senior editor and one of the co-owners. That's because about 20 years ago, a madman contacted me through the internet about some crazy project he had for a shared world story. I just deleted a similar request from a Nigerian prince, but for some reason, I responded to this one. And next thing I know, I was sucked into the vortex of the Shada. And Mike is an incredible visionary. He just has the ability to get people excited, get people motivated, get people sending in millions and millions of words. What he needed was an editor to beat those millions of words into 7,500 word stories and into the first book, which we very quickly realized of the Shada was going to be 2 books. I brought in a different element. I'm primarily a novelist. I've written the introductory story to almost every one of the Shadas. I was not involved in Zombie Park. And I had a short story of my own one day, which I decided to do something kind of gritty and raw. And every woman in my life hated that story fantastically. So I retooled it and I brought in a character of an artificial intelligence, kind of an anime-based character called Morrow. And that is the character that you see here in My Outcast State, which is the first book, if I can balance this correctly, of the 5-book Morrow Chronicles. This character just kind of took off. This started as a short story, and I had her in mind as kind of this alien machine that's found on an asteroid by an expedition. And I kind of envisioned her as this sort of sidekick character. What I didn't realize is that Morrow would move into my head and would sort of take over the writing of the now 10-book series, which is the 5 books of the Morrow Chronicles and the 5 books of Morrow Sea Changes. This artificial intelligence informed me she was nobody's sidekick, that she was very interested in exploring life, the universe, and the meaning of it all. And book after book started coming out. I remember at one point something happened where the character of Morrow did something, and my wife turned to me and said, "Why did she do that?" And I looked at her and said, "I don't know. She hasn't told me yet." And she said, "Lie down," because it was almost to the point of demonic possession. I should really list her as a co-author. Each book in the Morrow series is a complete book in and of itself, because I'm one of those people that hates somebody that does a book and then leaves it out, and you feel like, oh my God, I've got to get this next book in order to find out what the first one was about. Each book is a complete adventure. The first 5 books of the Morrow Chronicles detail a period from when Morrow is found after 50,000 years on an asteroid to when certain events in her life culminate. And the second series takes up 150 years later after those events, and Morrow is essentially having to reinvent herself to live with the legacies of everything that has come before, and to explore a new life for her. This is a character who, while incredibly deadly, nonetheless mostly impressed me with her humanity, if you will, and her interest in life. Created to destroy life, she has come to value life. This is a very emotional journey with a lot of explosions and gunfire in the middle distance, I suppose. And apparently Mike was interested enough in them to publish 5, 6 now so far. As I said, I'm finishing book 9, writing book 10 of that cycle, and then we'll have to have a pause and we'll see if Morrow has other stories she wants to tell.
And there was a certain science fiction short story collection we published too.
Yes, there was. We're working on a science fiction series called Not to Yield. If that's what you're.
Oh, no, I was referring to your detective.
Oh, okay. Yes, I've always liked wisecracking, Nick and Nora dialogue, science fiction detectives, and I wrote a short story, which was the first story that I had published in anything significant. It was done by Miller and Lee, who you may know from the Layton universe. They did a hardcover anthology called Lowport, where we were knocking around the cheesy sections of cities and spaceports. And I wrote a story, which they accepted and published, and here I am, published in a hardcover that's available in Barnes & Noble, and I want to tell my family and everybody about this. And then I thought, perhaps I should have maybe gone with another title than Lair of the Lesbian Love Goddess, which is the name of that short story. And it became known as the Lair series, basically about the 24th century spaceport of New York City, and a very recognizable Irish cop named Brian McManus, his very attractive partner, Regina Del Mar, who is very ambitious and on her way to the top of the New York City Port Authority Police, and their transgender informant, Freddie Bouvier, who was originally a character I almost killed off in the first story, just sort of, you know, a hooker informer. And another character like Morrow, who kind of wandered into these stories, insisted on being treated with more respect and latitude, and eventually became kind of the Gal Friday of the McManus Private Detective Bureau when that opened up. These stories were all just a hell of a lot of fun to write, the kind of tongue-in-cheek sort of stories, but there's an underlying theme of respect for people that are different from you. Which
and what's the title of the collection?
You're catching me with a mind block on it.
Yeah, me too. I'm getting old.
On the case. I always think of it as the Lair of the Lesbian Love Goddess Files, which was the original title until somebody slapped us around and said, stop doing that.
Do you have a copy of that in front of you, or no?
I can run. Why don't you? I'll go get that. Why don't you talk to the extremely handsome and internationally traveling digital nomad Gustavo Bondoni when I'm doing that. I'll be right back.
Well, I'll get to. I basically want to talk to everybody and have you promote all the projects you're working on, but I'd like to move to the next Shada project that's also in the works. And boy, I'm reluctant to mention this because it's moving along a bit slowly, and it's all my fault. It'll be the very first Shada novel, and it's being co-written by myself and William Joseph Roberts, writing as Scott Hillbilly Tackett. And it's titled Shada Aeronauts. And Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about this project?
Well, let's see. I'm still waiting on that chapter from a while ago to come back to me. The basic premise of Shada Aeronauts was a new experimental heavy airlift dirigible that they're using for a military test bed. They're using for commercial test beds, and it just happens to have its maiden flight during the Shada. And so they're going to encounter all kinds of different airborne creatures, things that happen on the ship, lots of interactions between the crew, the passengers, and we'll see how creative we can get on how they die, because yeah, blood. We're gonna blow things up. We're gonna make people suffer. It's all good.
Yeah,
You're a deeply disturbed man, Scott. Deeply disturbed.
Remember all those disaster movies from the 1970s?
Yeah.
Earthquake, The Towering Inferno, Titanic, or no, not Titanic. The Poseidon
Adventure.
Let's think of all those rolled up in a dirigible that's bigger than the Hindenburg. It's huge, and it's made of special material. It can fly higher than any balloon, any weather balloon in history. It's got all kinds of experimental tech on it. The only way they could even afford to build this thing was that they made it into a platform for all kinds of technology. And then, of course, they're going to have to use all that, a lot of it untested, to survive the Shada and hopefully maybe even save humanity. And the sacrifice for that's going to be incredible. And yes, Scott and I are basically co-writing it like every other chapter, and I've got to kick myself in the butt and get rolling, because it would have been like almost done by now had I done my part. I admit it, Scott. I've got to get into gear, but this will get finished. This was originally conceived as a short story. Back during the original Shada, back when we were putting this book together, as Ed mentioned to you, I sent an email out to a lot of people, and I created about 16 scenarios. I wrote 16 long paragraphs saying what I wanted each story to be, and one of them was the Aeronauts. And somebody took it up, but it just never quite worked for them. They just didn't want to do the research. They were like a horror author, and she wanted to turn it into kind of a traditional urban fantasy horror and didn't want to do the research into what it would take to, have a large balloon and everything necessary for that. So that story really never worked out. And so I kept this in the back of my head, and finally I pitched it to Scott. I think it was at LibertyCon or on the internet.
It was at the last. Wait, no. It was the last Liberty? Yeah, it was the last actual LibertyCon, I think.
Yeah, I pitched you the idea, and you were real cool. You jumped on board, and of course, I'm the one who's dragging his feet now and getting the darn thing done. So that's the next big thing. And that'll be like either the 9th or the 10th volume. I think there's only going to be 10 volumes altogether. What
10
might
is a good place to stop. Yes, the 10 is a good place to stop.
Yeah, and the one I haven't mentioned is one I've been working on for the last 15 years. And it's going to be a reprint anthology of all my Johnny the Salesman short stories. Johnny the Salesman is a major character in all the volumes who kind of ties things together, and he's humanity's only real hope. And what I've been doing is writing short stories that are not in any of these Shada books. I've been selling them to outside venues, different collections, magazines, etc. And I've got about enough of them now to put it out as just a reprint collection. It'll be called Shada Salesman. I want to write a couple of more, sell them, hopefully, knock on wood. And then that'll come out as either the 9th or the 10th. And yeah, that'll sort of be the capstone on everything. It gives a whole lot of background info on this character who's more mysterious than anything throughout the series. And now you'll be able to find out about it if you never read any of the short stories. So, yeah, that'll be the end of that. Let's see.
Well, Mike, I managed to get the
book
off my shelf over here. So this
on the side, your name is covering it. Other side.
There you go. On the case, where we have
I've got a copy of that one.
Also, of the other projects, Night in Charlotte, which is one of my works over here, which is going to be reprinted and will in fact feature, Mike was kind enough to allow me to use one of the Shada stories in there with a character that originated in Night in Charlotte, Debbie the vampire with the heart of gold. And then this series over here, which has been redone, which was Once a Hero. It's a trilogy set in the same universe as the Morrow stories about 75 years earlier. So thanks for the opportunity to show everything, Mike.
Yeah, no problem. Oh, I also wanted to mention that I'm assuming it's still in gear, but Tim Mulverhill not only wrote an excellent novella, but he's volunteered to write another one set during the Vietnam War. Is that true, Tim? Are we still on board for that?
We're still on board for that. It's been a slightly slower go than the original story, which I had decades of information building up for. Once again, doing tons of research on it. in the probably be wrapping it up in the very near future and getting that over to you. Oddly enough, this was one where I guess maybe authors go through this. Since you got my first story, this being my second one, had to get comfortable with discarding significant portions of some of the work that I had already done. I wasn't happy with the direction that it was going, and wanted to make a change, and really got rid of a lot of what I had been working on, because I felt that it wasn't up to the same quality as what I had sent over originally. So that's led to some of the delay. You know, plus life gets in the way sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
But that's on the way, and I think you'll be pleased with the direction that it's taken.
Cool. Can we tell them a little about it, such as maybe is it set against a particular battle during the Vietnam conflict?
It takes place at the very tail end of what's known as the Sante Raid, when American Special Forces in 1970 actually went into Hanoi in North Vietnam to rescue American POWs. And while the raid was technically a success, operationally it wasn't, since the POWs had been moved. So
I heard about this, yeah.
Yeah. So, but the way that my story is that raid was a diversion for something else that was going on just down the road. So, without giving up too much of what's going on,
Shada related.
Yes. So the planners knew that, yeah, the POWs had been moved, but go ahead with it anyway, because we need to get this other thing done that's more important. So it all ties into that.
Oh, good. My father.
I want to read that story. I want to read that.
So, yeah, even I was 3 years old in 1970, but I'm still doing a lot of research on what was like the number 5 songs released that year, and you know, all sorts of other stuff. And doing a lot of mathematics with some characters that I have to make sure ages all work out. And you guys all know how it is when you're trying to work something into a.
But that's the fun
shared
part of doing this.
Oh, it is. It is.
You get
Absolutely.
into the research. You just got to watch out for the rabbit holes you fall down into once you start the research process, because you never know where you're going to end up at 2 in the morning. Like, oh shit, I got to go to work tomorrow.
That's my problem. You know, my wife comes in. She goes, "Oh, did you get a lot written last night?" I'm like, "No, but I did 5 hours of research, and I found out all this other stuff that was great." And she's like, "You need to start putting it on paper." So, but
yeah,
like I said, you know, it's
yeah. I'm enjoying reading these war stories, because my father served 2 tours in Korea and 1 tour in Vietnam. And Arthur Sanchez wrote this great Korean War story for this. And like Rachel Cates, you know, as you saw from her insert video, talked about her story. And I'm going to be writing a story set during World War I, and it'll be during that first big tank offensive by the British. And the fact is, I had my mother's grandfather died in World War I, Sergeant Peter Casey, right just like days before the disbandment of the 9th Service Battalion of the Royal Munster Fusiliers. He was an Irishman, and back during World War I, the British Army had all of these, you know, battalions that were all from like certain locations. So like whole families and neighbors, you know, would all be fighting together. And there'd be Irish battalions like the Royal Munster Fusiliers. There'd be all Jewish ones, because they all had different sigils on their hats. And there were like 2 different Jewish battalions where every man in them was Jewish. So it was really interesting how they'd quartered off, as it were, the military during World War I. So I'm looking forward to doing that. You know, first, I'm going to be working on a certain novel with Scott. Okay, I'd like to let the rest of everybody talk about some, you know, other projects they're working on outside of Copper Dog. Gustavo, come on, you know you've got a lot, so show us some stuff.
Let me make a very quick library run.
Okay.
Got it. So right now I'm actually working on short stories. I turned in a novel to Severed Press, actually, in a world that I've created, which is basically a place where a certain amount of reptiles from the prehistoric area had survived. Not actually dinosaurs. They were Nothosaurus. They're actually reptiles. But based on the DNA of these creatures, geneticists in Korea, in the US, in Russia, were able to bring back certain monsters. So there's been 3 books in that series already. It starts off with Ice Station Death, where the monsters trash an Argentine Antarctic base, followed by Jungle Lab Terror, where I moved the action to the Darien Gap in between Colombia and Panama, where the Pan American Highway actually doesn't go. You can actually drive from Tierra del Fuego to Alaska, except for like 100 miles in the middle in the Darien Gap. This is supposedly the most dangerous place in the Western Hemisphere. So that's where this one takes place. And the third one, which is out late last year, is called Test Site Horror, and this one takes place in Russia. And everybody's always very surprised by this one, because in this one, Russian special forces are actually the good guys, which is very much reversal of what generally happens in most Western, if you like, canon. So apart from that, which is my novels have been focused on this. I have a new book coming out from a Scottish publisher. It's going to be launched in Washington and Worldcon at the end of the year. It's the sequel to my novel Outside. We aren't quite sure about the title just yet. It's possibly going to be called Schism or maybe something else. It's a science fiction novel, which I also write science fiction. This is probably my best known science fiction novel. It's called Siege. Let me try to get it in the camera so you can see it. Siege. Hard to get the camera done. There we go.
A little bit there. There you go.
There we go. This is probably my best known science fiction novel. It's set very, very far in the future. Mankind has basically split into factions, divided by how much or how little they're willing to upload and merge their consciousness with others. So you have baseline humans, which are just like you and me. You have uploaders who are actually a single mind. And then you have everything in the middle. And of course, they all want to kill the other ones. At the end of the day, this novel actually starts with the war over and the defeated baseline humans hiding from everyone else. And the novel begins when everybody else finds them. So that's the setup, and I don't want to tell you everything, but basically the uploaded factions are fighting amongst themselves, and one of the factions wants to ask the baseline humans for help. So that's why they've been discovered. And finally, I also do short fiction, a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of science fiction. I do some literary fiction, but we're not going to get into that.
A little bit? Okay.
Okay, I write a lot of short fiction. And I have my latest collection, which came out a couple of years ago, which is a bit of everything. It's a bit of science fiction, a bit of fantasy. The cover, which looks like a dragon, is actually one of these genetically modified monsters. So this is actually a science fiction story. It's the one that started the ball rolling, which ended up with the other series. This book is from Gardridge Books, and it's basically it's called Off the Beaten Path, because it's a collection of my stories which don't take place either in the US or in Western Europe or in a typical science fiction and fantasy setting, but actually move away. There's stories, there's a zombie story in Africa, there are stories in Asia, there are stories set in South America. The only one in North America is actually in Alaska. It's about basically Alaska becomes, after the sea levels rise and global warming happens, Alaska becomes kind of a temperate area where people actually are starting to move because they can farm. But it's kind of the Wild West at the same time. So that's the one North American story in this collection. So I have a little bit of everything, and I have a few books coming out this year. One of the ones I wanted to specially mention is called The Song of Sanger, which is a sword and sorcery book, and is actually being published by our good friend William Joseph Roberts. So that one is going to come out soon. And I have a literary collection coming out a little earlier. And as I said, a sequel to one of my science fiction novels coming out at Worldcon in December in Washington, D.C. So if anyone's at Worldcon, please look for me. I will be there in person unless international travel becomes really hard again.
One quick question. I'm sure a lot of your fans want to know this. You probably answered it 1,000 times. Do you write everything in 2 languages? And also, which language do you write it in first?
I write in English exclusively. I hate translating my work to Spanish. I can do it. There's some. If you look around, there's some work. There's some of my work that I translated out there, and there's also work by other people that I translated to Spanish out there. But I actually hate translating in Spanish because, well, basically what happens is the science fiction and fantasy world. It's easier to read in English. If you want to read science fiction and fantasy, you have a lot. First of all, you have everything is published in English eventually. And even the foreign work is better in translation in English because you probably have 4 or 5 different translations, and the only one that ends up selling is the best. Wherein in Spanish, you'd be lucky to have 1 translation. And it might be good, it might be terrible. But generally, the English translation that everybody has is a good one. So when you're reading, for example, I don't know, if you're reading Solaris by Lem, you have a much better chance of getting a good English translation than a good Spanish translation. Even though the classic English translation was terrible because it came from the French, now you actually can get good English translations. It's very unlikely that you'll find a good Spanish translation of every single book. There's some that are translated by really good translators, and some that are just terrible. So I tend to read in English because the market is so much bigger. The amount of stuff you can get is just a lot bigger. So I'm used to hearing the cadence of literary work in my head in English. So when it comes time to write, I mean, I can write in Spanish. My Spanish is grammatically perfect. I mean, I can write, but I hate it because I don't feel the rhythm. I don't feel the rightness of a sentence the same way that I do in English. So yeah, it's strange, but I exclusively write in English. I haven't been translating it at all. I really hate to do it. So,
for the flip side of the coin, back in the late 1980s, just after I graduated, I was working for video services at Syracuse University, and Muirhill Vargas Llosa, is that how you pronounce his name?
Mario Vargas.
Yeah, he came to SU in a very small classroom, and I was videotaping a 1-hour lecture he gave. And that was one of the big questions was, because he spoke very fluent English, and people were saying, so do you write also in English, and do you feel like the book should be put out in English? And he just kind of shook his head and goes, no, it's Spanish. It was meant to be in Spanish. And so he apparently has a different view than you do on.
Well, he won a Nobel Prize. So if anyone's bilingual reading this, listen to Vargas Llosa, not to me.
Okay. Well, I want to move over to William Joseph Roberts, a.k.a. Scott Hillbilly Tackett. Scott, tell us about anything you want. You're working on a lot of stuff. You can't hide.
Oh, dear God. Well, I am the head of Three Ravens Publishing to start with, and I have been trying to play catch-up after life got a hold of us, and we had this big bridge project and moving the garden and everything else this year. And Song of Sangar is in the queue to be done sometime this year. Besides that, last year I ended up putting out 4 novels of my own. We have the Starflight project right now, which is based on the video game Starflight from back in the 80s. It was originally the first open sandbox world ever developed for a video game. And, I keep telling all the authors that we have on this anthology that we're doing and the ones that plan on continuing for novels that if we do this right, Greg gets to make another video game, because we boost the notoriety back up there, get people interested in it even better. And but it's cool. I've got oh God, I got so many projects right now. Keep up with my blog, WilliamJosephRoberts.com. That's the easiest thing, or over at 3ravenspublishing.com.
Okay. For myself, I'd say I've got a Facebook page, 2 Facebook pages. Actually, I've got about a dozen Facebook pages, but the 2 that have my name are Michael H. Hanson, one with a period after the H, one without it. And I like to post a lot of my poetry. I know I talk about, horror a lot and science fiction and fantasy, which are the short stories that I generally write. But I'm also a poet, and I write horror poetry, love poetry, mainstream poetry, science fiction and fantasy. And I just didn't want to push all that because a lot of that's with a different press. But yeah, Michael H. Hanson, Facebook's a good way to reach me. Copperdogpublishing.com. We need to update that website a little bit. It's a little behind, but that's also a good place to go. And we also have a Copper Dog page on Facebook. And I just created, there's really nothing up there, but I just created a Copper Dog Publishing YouTube channel, which breaks down into the 3 presses. There's going to be 3 YouTube channels: Moondream Press, Racket River Press, and Pumpkin Hill Press. And I'll be doing videos and reading excerpts from people's stuff, hopefully getting Ed to come on board and read, and also posting that on YouTube, which we'll post on Facebook. But we're really trying to open up, recently opened up an Instagram account for Copper Dog Publishing, and I made a few posts on that. So hopefully I can do a lot more advertising for all these wonderful writers you see around me on this screen. So yeah, for the rest of you, please tell us how we can contact you and read your stuff. Ed, we'll do you next.
Okay. Edward McKeown. I'm available on Facebook under my name. Can also be found on the Copper Dog page, which also has underneath it the Ad Astra, which is my work that's not currently done through Copper Dog. So you can see that there. I'm easy to find on Facebook. That's probably the easiest way to get hold of me. And Mike, remember, we already have on YouTube the dive, which was the audio that was done on the first Shada, so you can pull that right over. And
of course, since that book's been recorded, it hasn't been, I think that's one of the 2 that haven't been released yet by ACX. Yeah, the guy who read that did a really good job too. Yeah. Come on, Gustavo. How do we get a hold of you? How do we find you?
So I'm on
Digital Nomad
under my name as Gustavo Bondoni, and I also have a website, which is gustavobondoni.com. So, and I'm also on Twitter at gbondoni. So I'm pretty much easy to get hold of. Anyone who wants to make a big budget movie out of one of my books will always be welcome to drop me a line. And anyone who wants to talk about the books or ask me anything is equally always welcome.
Great. Tim, I don't know if you're promoting yourself much as a writer, but this is your opportunity to do that if you want.
I'm not yet, but if anyone needs to get a hold of me, Facebook page, Tim Mulverhill. You can drop me a line via IM, and that's probably the best way to get a hold of me right now. I'm hoping to do more in the future. I'm just trying to keep up with the commitments I've made so far. But beyond that, yeah, I really, really enjoy the release from writing.
I didn't take short story writing seriously until after my divorce, and I was in my early 40s. You can start at any age. There's no rules about it. I just have to tell you, Tim, if I pronounce it right, The Morrigan, which is Tim's first of 2 novellas that'll be in Shada War, it just blows me away. I mean, it's the complexity of it, because it's the very first Shada novella that was ever written by anyone. Because we've all got these 5,000 to 7,000 word stories in all the other books, but Tim took the opportunity to just expand. And this expansion is something that, didn't occur in print until Zombie Park came out, where we really allow the authors the opportunity to play with their characters in a big way. And I was really happy with Zombie Park, and I'm really looking forward to Shada War. Well, I guess we're coming to the end of our panel. Copper Dog Publishing is alive. It's been a little bit slow the last couple of years, and we all know why. And I hope everybody's getting their shots. Sorry if I'm sounding political, but I want everyone to be healthy, and I want the world to open up again, and we can all get out there, meet our loved ones, and hug them. I'm so happy LibertyCon is in existence in some form. And it would be great if everyone surrounding me on the screen could be at the actual LibertyCon sometime. I'd love to meet you all and shoot the bull over a few drinks and have some fun.
Sounds good.
Okay, absolutely. So on behalf of Copper Dog Publishing and Moondream Press, which covers most of what we've been talking about, thanks for being here. Check out our books online. We've got a lot of great authors, and we hope to bring you a lot more books in the near future. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Everybody do well.
Thank you.